March 12, 1945, rural Georgia. A construction crew in 2001 found a metal box buried beneath the old bathhouse foundation at what used to be Camp Crawford. Inside, 847 letters written in German, never sent. This is the story of what those letters couldn't say what happened when 847 German women stepped off a train expecting violence and got hot showers instead. What happened next broke their entire worldview. And it started with something as simple as soap. The train rolled to a stop just after sunrise. The metal wheels scraped against the tracks with a sound that seemed too quiet for what was about to happen. Inside the boxcars, 847 German women sat in darkness, their uniforms stiff with sweat and dirt, their hair tangled and matted, their eyes hollow from months of fear and hunger. They had traveled across an ocean and half a continent to reach this moment. They expected it to be their last moment of dignity. The air outside was warm and heavy, carrying the smell of pine trees, diesel fuel, and red Georgia clay. When the boxcar doors slid open, the brightness hit them like a physical force. Many hadn't seen open sky in days. Some raised their hands to shield their eyes, others simply stood there blinking, trying to remember what sunlight felt like on skin. They stepped down slowly, one foot, then another. The platform beneath them felt solid in a way nothing had felt solid in months. Their legs trembled, some from weakness, some from fear, most from both. Liesl Vogel was 19 years old and weighed 73 pounds. She had been a straight-A student in Munich before the war. Chemistry, biology, literature, subjects that felt like they belonged to another lifetime now, another girl who no longer existed. She'd joined the medical corps in 1944 because her father insisted it was safer than the alternatives. He'd been wrong about that. She'd spent the last 6 months as a field nurse assistant, patching soldiers who screamed and bled and died anyway, sleeping in barns and cellars, and once in a flooded ditch. The last time she'd had a proper bath was September. It was now March. She stood on the platform and tried to prepare herself for what came next. She had been told many things about Americans. That they were savages, that they showed no mercy to prisoners, that capture meant humiliation, starvation, or worse. Her mother had warned her in the last letter she'd received back in France. Her commanding officers had confirmed it during the final chaotic days before capture. The propaganda had been clear and consistent. Americans treated German prisoners like animals. She expected shouting. She expected rough hands. She expected to be stripped and searched in public, to be pushed and driven like cattle until she collapsed. That's what happened to prisoners. Everyone knew that. Instead, the American guards simply stood in formation, calm, and organized, their rifles held low. One of them, a sergeant with graying hair and a weathered face, stepped forward. He looked at the women with an expression Liesl couldn't quite identify. Not hatred, not pity, something quieter. "Take your time, ladies," he said in accented but clear German. "Nobody's going to rush you." Liesl froze. The word ladies hung in the air like something foreign, something that didn't belong in this moment. Prisoners weren't called ladies. Enemies weren't addressed with courtesy. This had to be a trick. Behind her, Margareta Steinberg, Greta, to everyone who knew her, whispered harshly, "It's a performance. Don't believe it. Show no weakness." Greta was 34 years old, a former teacher, a communications officer who joined early and believed deeply. She was the kind of woman who never cried, never complained, never showed fear, even when fear was the only rational response. She weighed 94 pounds and looked like she'd been carved from stone. Her jaw was set, her eyes were hard. She'd prepared herself to die before showing the enemy any vulnerability. But the American sergeant didn't look like he was performing. He just looked tired. Frieda Bachmann, 27. A clerk from a working-class family in Hamburg, didn't care whether it was a performance or not. She was practical to her bones. She weighed 82 pounds, her feet hurt, and she just wanted water. If the Americans were going to kill them, fine. If they were going to feed them, better. Either way, standing on this platform wasn't helping anything. She stepped forward first, then Liesl, then, reluctantly, Greta. The other women followed. There were 847 of them in total. Nurses, clerks, communication assistants, cooks, a few volunteers who'd followed military units during the final catastrophic months. The youngest was 15. The oldest was 47. The average age was 26. The average weight was 89 pounds. They should have weighed between 120 and 130. They were walking skeletons wrapped in dirty uniforms, held together by fear and the stubborn refusal to collapse. They formed a ragged line and began to walk. The camp appeared before them like something from a dream. Liesl had expected a prison. Barbed wire guard towers, mud and despair. Instead, she saw painted wooden buildings arranged in neat rows, swept roads, windows that actually had glass, grass that looked like someone had bothered to cut it. Near the entrance, a large sign read, Camp Crawford, U.S. Army POW Facility. The letters were clean and official, not threatening, just factual. "This looks like a village," Frida muttered, "not a prison." Greta's response was immediate and sharp. "It's designed to look safe, to make us compliant. Don't fall for it." But Liesl was staring at something else. Beyond the gate, a row of new wooden buildings with metal roofs gleamed under the morning sun. Steam drifted from small chimneys. She could see pipes running along the outside walls. Buckets of water stood at corners, and the smell, faint but unmistakable, of warm soap floated through the air. She hadn't smelled real soap in so long she'd almost forgotten what it was like. A sign near the buildings read, Women's Bathhouse, constructed January 1945. January. 3 months ago. Before they'd even been captured. Before they'd even arrived. The Americans had built this for them. On purpose. With planning and materials and labor. They'd anticipated the arrival of German women prisoners and had constructed private bathing facilities specifically for them. Liesl's mind struggled to process this. It didn't fit. None of it fit. "Why?" she whispered to no one in particular. No one had an answer. They were directed first to a medical checkpoint, a long wooden building with clean windows and the sharp smell of disinfectant. American medics in white coats waited inside, along with several nurses who looked calm and professional and completely unthreatening. The women filed in slowly. Fear made them cautious. Hunger made them clumsy. A young American nurse approached Liesl with a clipboard and a gentle smile. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her uniform was spotless. Her hands were clean. She wore gloves that looked new. "Name?" she asked in broken German. "Liesl Vogel. Age, 19. The nurse wrote carefully, then gestured to a scale nearby. Liesl stepped onto it, feeling the metal cold beneath her feet, even through her worn boots. 73 pounds. The nurse's expression shifted slightly. Not disgust. Not judgment. Something that looked almost like concern. She wrote the number down, then gently took Liesl's wrist to check her pulse. "When did you last eat protein?" she asked. Liesl had to think. Protein. Real protein. Not the watery soup they'd been living on. Not the crusts of black bread that were more sawdust than grain. "I don't remember," she admitted. The nurse nodded slowly. She reached into a pocket and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. She held it out. "For now," she said. "Real food comes at breakfast." Liesl took it, her hands shaking slightly. She unwrapped the paper. Chocolate. A Hershey's bar. Brown and perfect and impossible. She hadn't seen chocolate since 1942. Hadn't tasted it since her 16th birthday, which felt like it had happened to a different person in a different world. She stared at it, unable to move. "It's okay," the nurse said gently. "It's for you." Liesl folded the paper back over it quickly and shoved it into her pocket. Some part of her brain insisted this was a trick, that it would be taken back, that showing gratitude would be used against her somehow. She couldn't afford to trust this. She couldn't afford to hope. But the chocolate stayed in her pocket. No one took it away. The medical examination continued. Height, weight, temperature. A check for lice, they found them, of course, in almost everyone. The delousing powder came next, applied with careful hands and quiet apologies for the indignity. They checked for infections, malnutrition injuries that hadn't healed properly. The medics worked quickly but not roughly. They explained each step. They preserved as much modesty as the circumstances allowed. The statistics they recorded that day told a story more brutal than any propaganda. 847 women total. 338 severely malnourished, 40%. 575 with untreated skin infections, 68%. An average weight of 89 pounds when they should have averaged 125. The youngest was 15 years old and weighed 68 pounds. The oldest was 47 and weighed 103 pounds, only because she'd been captured more recently. Every single one of them carried the physical evidence of a nation that had spent its people like currency and found itself bankrupt. Greta endured the medical check with rigid silence. She answered questions in clipped monosyllables. She refused to make eye contact with the American staff. When they tried to give her chocolate, she initially refused, then accepted it only when an officer made it clear refusal wasn't an option. She didn't eat it. She put it in her pocket and tried to forget it existed. Frida, practical as always, cooperated fully. She answered every question, followed every instruction, took the chocolate and ate half of it immediately. "I'm not stupid," she muttered to Liesel afterward. "Free food is free food." After the medical checkpoint came the bathhouse. The wooden building stood solid and clean steam rising from its chimneys into the Georgia morning. The women approached it slowly, still half convinced this was some elaborate cruelty, that the kindness was a mask that would be ripped away at the last moment. The door opened. Warm air rushed out, carrying the scent of soap and clean water. Inside the building was divided into private stalls. Not a large communal room, not an open space designed for humiliation. Individual stalls with doors that closed. Each one had a metal showerhead, a hook for clothing, and a wooden bench. On every bench sat a small bar of soap wrapped in paper stamped with a US Army logo. Liesel stepped into one of the stalls and closed the door behind her. The space was small but private, completely private. No one could see her. No one was watching. No one was waiting to mock or abuse or photograph her degradation. She touched the soap carefully. The paper crinkled under her fingers. She unwrapped it slowly, as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. The soap was white and smooth. Real soap, made from real fat, not the sawdust substitutes they'd been using in Germany when they could get anything at all. She brought it close to her face and inhaled. Lemons. It smelled like lemons and summer, and a world where small luxuries still existed. Her hands trembled as she hung her filthy uniform on the hook. She sat on the bench for a moment, just breathing, trying to understand where she was and what was happening. Then she stood and reached for the showerhead chain. The first drops of water hit the wooden floor with a soft tapping sound. She pulled the chain fully and stepped under the stream. Hot water. Not lukewarm, not cold. Hot. 105 degrees Fahrenheit, though she had no way of knowing the exact number. Just that it was hotter than anything she'd felt in 18 months. Hotter than she'd believed she would ever feel again. It cascaded over her shoulders, down her back, over her arms. 6 months of accumulated dirt and sweat and fear began to loosen and wash away. Grime that had seemed permanent, embedded in every crack of her skin, finally surrendered to the warmth and the pressure and the simple, relentless presence of clean water. She picked up the soap. The first touch of it against her skin felt almost obscene. Rich, slippery. It lathered easily, coating her hands, her arms, her neck. The lemon scent intensified. She scrubbed at skin that had forgotten what clean felt like. Her hair, matted and tangled for so long, slowly began to soften under the water. Liesel stood there, water running over her soap in her hands, and for the first time in months, she felt something crack open inside her chest. She started to cry. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears that mixed with the shower water and disappeared down the drain. She cried because she was clean. She cried because she was warm. She cried because this small, simple mercy felt more devastating than any cruelty she'd imagined. Why would the enemy do this? Why would they build private bathhouses with hot water and real soap? Why would they wrap the soap in paper and stamp it with official logos as if German prisoners deserved care and dignity? Nothing made sense. Everything she'd been told was wrong. Or this was a trap so elaborate she couldn't see the edges. She didn't know which possibility frightened her more. In another stall, Greta stood under cold water. She'd deliberately chosen cold, refusing to accept the comfort of heat. She washed quickly, mechanically, her face set in hard lines. This was psychological warfare, she told herself. They wanted to break the prisoners with kindness, make them soft and grateful and compliant. She wouldn't fall for it. She would take what she needed, the cleanliness, the basic hygiene, and give nothing back. No gratitude, no trust, no weakness. But even Greta, with all her rigid discipline, couldn't entirely ignore the relief of being clean, couldn't completely suppress the small, traitorous thought that whispered, "This feels good." She hated that thought. She shoved it down and finished washing in silence. Frida, in a third stall, simply enjoyed the shower. She'd decided within the first 30 seconds that she didn't care why the Americans were doing this. She was filthy. They were offering hot water. She was going to use it. Questions could come later. For now, she scrubbed every inch of skin she could reach and washed her hair 3 times just because she could. When they emerged from the bathhouse, the women found clean towels waiting. Actual towels, not rags. And new cotton underclothes, plain and simple, but clean and dry and free of lice. Some of the women stood there, wrapped in towels, still dripping, still unable to process what had just happened. A few cried openly. Others stayed silent, their faces carefully blank. All of them looked different than they had an hour ago. Cleaner, yes, but also more vulnerable. The dirt and grime had been a kind of armor. Without it, they felt exposed. Liesl dried herself, slowly running the towel over skin that felt almost raw from the scrubbing. She put on the clean underclothes and felt the fabric settle against her body. Soft. No rough seams, no itching, no lice crawling in hidden places. She looked at her hands. They were clean. Actually clean. The lines of her palms were visible again. Her fingernails, though broken and short, were no longer black with embedded filth. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to cry. She wanted to run. She didn't know what she wanted. Outside the bathhouse, American guards waited with simple cotton dresses, not uniforms, just plain dresses in various sizes. They handed them out quietly, professionally, with no commentary or judgment. The women dressed in silence. And then came another shock, another small impossibility. A table covered with items they hadn't seen in years. Combs, brushes, cotton handkerchiefs, small mirrors, toothbrushes, tooth powder, hairpins. "Choose what you need," a guard said in careful German. "One of each item." The women stared. Choose. They were being given a choice. Not ordered, not assigned, asked to choose. Greta stood rigid, refusing to approach the table. It was Frida who finally stepped forward, picked up a comb, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I need this. I'm taking it." As if her practicality gave everyone else permission, the other women slowly approached and selected items. Careful, hesitant, still waiting for the trap to spring. Liesl chose a comb and a small mirror. She looked at her reflection for the first time in months. The face that stared back shocked her. Hollow cheeks, shadowed eyes, a jaw too sharp, bones too visible, but clean. Her hair, still wet, hung in dark tangles that would need patient work to undo. But it was clean hair. She barely recognized herself. Around her, the sounds of the camp settled into an unexpected quiet. No shouting, no violence, just the low voices of guards giving instructions, the shuffle of feet on gravel, the distant call of birds in the pine trees. The camp didn't feel like the nightmare they'd imagined during the war. It felt controlled, organized, almost calm. Several women later admitted this moment broke their beliefs more thoroughly than any speech or propaganda ever could. They had been told Americans were monsters. They had prepared for torture. Instead, they'd received hot showers, clean clothes, and combs. The cognitive dissonance was devastating. They were led next to the mess hall, a long wooden building with wide windows that let in the morning light. The smell hit them from 50 feet away. Food, real food, warm and rich and impossible. Eggs, bacon, fresh bread, something sweet they couldn't identify. Liesel's stomach twisted violently, half hunger, half disbelief. Frida inhaled deeply and muttered, "If this is a dream, don't wake me up." Even Greta, with all her suspicion and rigid control, couldn't entirely hide the way her body responded to the smell of cooking meat. She hadn't eaten bacon in 3 years, hadn't seen an egg that wasn't powdered since 1943. The mess hall doors opened. Inside, long metal tables stretched the length of the room. American soldiers in white aprons worked behind a serving line, moving quickly and efficiently. Trays were stacked neatly. The floor was clean. Everything was organized with a precision that felt almost German, which made the whole situation even more surreal. The women filed in, slowly silent, waiting for someone to tell them this was a mistake. A cook, middle-aged and thick-armed, looked up from the serving line and spoke in English. A translator, another guard, repeated it in German. "Step forward, everyone eats." On the counter sat large trays of scrambled eggs still steaming, piles of bacon strips crisp and dark, bowls of oatmeal with actual butter melting on top, baskets of bread, real bread, not the black sawdust they'd been eating, and oranges, fresh oranges, bright and impossible. One woman whispered, "This is for soldiers, not us." But the cook simply gestured them forward. "Come on, don't be shy." Liesel took a tray with both hands, afraid of dropping it. She moved down the line. A soldier scooped eggs onto her plate. Another added bacon, 3 strips, then a fourth. A third placed 2 slices of bread beside it. Someone handed her an orange. She stared at the plate. More food than she'd seen in months. More food than should exist for a prisoner, for an enemy, for someone who had no right to expect anything except cruelty. Greta took her tray mechanically, her face a mask. She accepted the food without comment, without expression, as if refusing to acknowledge what was happening. Frida looked at her loaded plate and said quietly, "I'm going to eat until I can't move." They sat at the long tables, the room filled with the sounds of forks on metal quiet, chewing the scrape of chairs. Some women ate quickly, desperately, as if the food might vanish. Others ate slowly, carefully, trying to make it last. A few couldn't eat at all, their stomachs too shrunken, too shocked by the sudden abundance. Liesel picked up a piece of bacon. She held it for a moment, feeling the oil on her fingers, seeing the striations of meat and fat. She brought it to her mouth. The taste would come in part 2. The full weight of it. The devastating realization of what it meant. But even now, in this first meal, she could feel something breaking inside her. Some wall she'd built to survive. Around her, other women were having the same silent crisis. To eat this food meant accepting something they couldn't quite name, meant acknowledging that the enemy was feeding them better than their own country had in the final year of war. The paradox sat heavy in the room, unspoken, but impossible to ignore. After breakfast, they were assigned barracks, long wooden buildings with rows of metal-framed bunks. Each bunk had a real mattress, thin but actual cotton, not straw, 2 wool blankets, a small pillow. Liesel sat on her assigned bunk and pressed her hand against the mattress. It gave slightly under pressure. Soft. No bedbugs. No smell of mold or sweat. She lay down carefully, as if the bunk might break, and stared at the ceiling. Clean. Fed. Safe. The words felt like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. Across the aisle, Frida was already asleep, her breathing deep and even. Exhaustion had finally caught up with her, and she'd surrendered to it completely. Greta sat on her bunk, back straight, eyes open. She was cataloguing everything, looking for the surveillance, the hidden cameras, the trap that had to exist. She found nothing obvious, which only made her more certain it was there. An American guard walked through the barracks, checking that everyone had what they needed. He moved quietly, respectfully. When he reached Greta's bunk, he paused. "Everything all right, ma'am?" She stared at him. "Ma'am," another word that didn't belong. "Fine," she said in clipped English. He nodded and moved on. Liesl watched this exchange and thought, they're not acting like conquerors. They're acting like hosts. The thought was so absurd she almost laughed. That evening, as the sun set over Camp Crawford, the women gathered for roll call in the central yard. The American officer in charge was Corporal Raymond Thatcher, 38 years old, from Kansas. He'd been a farmer before the war. He'd lost his younger brother at Anzio, killed by German 88mm artillery. He'd requested transfer to POW duty because he couldn't kill anymore, couldn't look at young soldiers and pull the trigger. He was tired of death. He stood before the assembled women and spoke in careful German, reading from a paper. "You will be assigned work duties, light duties, laundry, mending, garden work. You will be paid 10 cents per day in camp scrip. You may use this scrip at the canteen to purchase small items, writing paper toiletries, occasionally small treats. You will receive 3 meals daily. You will have access to medical care. You will be allowed to send and receive mail subject to inspection. You will be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention." He paused, looking at the faces before him, hollow-eyed, frightened, confused. "You are prisoners of war," he continued, "but you are also human beings. We will treat you as such. We expect you to follow rules. We expect respect. But we will give respect in return. This is not a negotiation. This is simply how we do things." He folded the paper and dismissed them. The women dispersed slowly, whispering among themselves in small clusters, trying to make sense of what they'd just heard, trying to reconcile the reality of this place with everything they'd been told about American barbarism. Liesl walked back to her barracks in silence. She climbed into her bunk and pulled the blanket up to her chin. The wool was scratchy but warm. Real warmth, not the desperate, shivering cold she'd known for months. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the chocolate bar the nurse had given her. Still there. Still real. She unwrapped it carefully in the growing darkness and broke off a small piece. The chocolate melted on her tongue, sweet and rich and impossibly luxurious. She closed her eyes and tried not to cry again. Somewhere in the darkness, Greta's voice came low and harsh. "Don't get comfortable. This is psychological warfare. They're softening us, making us compliant. Remember who we are. Remember who they are." But Liesl was tired of remembering, tired of the war and the fear and the endless grinding certainty that the world was nothing but cruelty. Maybe she thought, just maybe, the enemy wasn't who she'd been told. The thought terrified her more than any threat of violence ever had. Because if that was true, then everything, absolutely everything she'd believed, was a lie. Outside, the American flag hung still in the evening air. Guard towers stood dark against the sky. But there was no shouting, no screams, no sounds of suffering, just quiet, and the distant song of crickets. And 847 German women lying in clean beds, trying to understand what mercy meant when it came from the hands of their enemy. The bathhouse stood silent in the darkness, steam no longer rising, but the pipes still warm, waiting for tomorrow, when it would all begin again. This was just the first day. They told us Americans starve their prisoners. Then they gave us 6 pieces of bacon each. And when the letters from home arrived, we learned the truth. Our families were the ones starving. The first week passed in a haze of disbelief. Liesl woke each morning to sunlight filtering through clean windows, to the sound of birdsong instead of artillery, to the absence of fear. The routine established itself with quiet efficiency: wake at 6, wash at the outdoor basins, breakfast at 7, work assignments at 8, lunch at noon, rest period at 2, dinner at 6, lights out at 9. The predictability itself felt like a gift. After months of chaos, never knowing if you'd eat, sleep, or survive the next hour, the simple rhythm of scheduled days felt almost decadent. She was assigned to the camp infirmary. The American doctor, A tired-looking man in his 50s named Captain Morrison assessed her medical knowledge with a few brief questions, nodded, and put her to work immediately. No speech about collaboration. No political lecture, just, "We need help. You know nursing. Let's go." The infirmary was a long, bright room with actual medical supplies. Bandages that weren't reused rags, sulfur powder, iodine, aspirin, morphine for the severe cases. The kind of resources that had disappeared from German field hospitals a year ago. On her third day, a young American soldier came in with an infected cut on his hand. Liesl cleaned it, applied sulfur powder, wrapped it carefully. The soldier thanked her, in English, which she barely understood, but the tone was clear. Gratitude from an American soldier to a German prisoner. Captain Morrison watched this interaction and said simply, "Good work, Nurse Vogel." It was the first time in a year anyone had acknowledged her professional competence. Not her nationality, not her status as prisoner or enemy, just her skill. Something inside her chest tightened painfully. Greta was assigned to the laundry. She'd refused office work, refused anything that smacked of collaboration with the enemy. Washing clothes felt safely neutral, mechanical. She could do it without compromising whatever principles she was still clinging to. But even the laundry revealed things that unsettled her. She washed American soldiers' uniforms, work shirts, trousers, underclothes, normal clothes worn by normal men. Sometimes there were small tears that needed mending. She mended them mechanically, efficiently. The next day, the clothes would come back with small notes tucked into the pockets. "Thank you." "Good job." "Appreciate the help." The notes bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Monsters didn't say thank you. Savages didn't express appreciation for mended shirts. She threw the notes away and tried not to think about what they meant. Frida worked in the kitchen, which suited her perfectly. Practical, useful, and most importantly, she got to see exactly what went into the food. She watched the camp cooks prepare meals with the kind of abundance that seemed obscene. Real butter, fresh vegetables, meat that wasn't spoiled. They prepared the same food for the POWs as for the American soldiers. Same portions, same quality. She checked the ration lists when no one was looking, needing to confirm what her eyes were telling her. Prisoners of war, 2,800 calories per day. U.S. Army soldiers, 2,800 calories per day. Identical. She thought about the rations in Germany. The official civilian ration in 1945 had dropped to 1,000 calories per day in the cities. In reality, most people got far less. She thought about her husband in Hamburg, if he was still alive. What was he eating? Watery soup, potato peels. The bark bread people had started making when flour ran out. The thought sat in her stomach like a stone. But she kept working, kept cooking. Because what else was there to do? Week 2 began with a morning that changed everything. Breakfast. The women filed into the mess hall as they had every day, still half expecting the abundance to vanish, to be revealed as temporary or conditional. But the serving line remained exactly as generous as it had been. If anything, the cooks seemed to be watching the women's health improve and adjusting portions upward. Liesl took her tray, moved down the line. Scrambled eggs, yellow and fluffy, steaming in the morning air. A thick slice of bread, real wheat bread with a golden crust. A small bowl of oatmeal with a pat of butter melting into a golden pool on top. An apple. And bacon. 6 strips of bacon, dark and crispy, laid across her plate like an accusation. She carried her tray to a table and sat down. Around her, other women were settling in with the same loaded plates. The smell filled the mess hall, salt and smoke, and rendered fat. Rich, heavy, undeniable. Liesl picked up a piece of bacon. She held it between her fingers, feeling the slight grease coat her skin. The strip was maybe 4 inches long, crispy at the edges, with striations of meat and fat clearly visible, cooked perfectly. She could see where the salt crystals had caramelized into the surface. She brought it close to her face. The smell hit her first. Salt and hickory smoke, rich and heavy and almost overwhelming. She hadn't smelled pork fat in 18 months. Hadn't eaten real meat since before her capture. Her stomach knotted, half from hunger, half from something she couldn't name. Anticipation, dread, both. She put it in her mouth. The crispy edge cracked between her teeth. The sound of it, that brittle snap, was almost as shocking as the taste. Then the fat began to melt. It coated her tongue, slippery and warm, spreading across her palate like liquid silk. The texture was overwhelming, crispy, giving way to soft, solid, becoming fluid. The taste came in waves. Salt hit first, sharp and clean and bright. Then the fat, smooth, almost sweet in its richness. Then the smoke, subtle and deep, like something that had taken hours to develop. And underneath it all, the fundamental taste of meat. Protein. Substance. The kind of nourishment her body had been screaming for. It melted down her throat, coating everything as it went. She could feel the warmth spreading through her chest, her stomach. Oil slicked her lips, her fingers. For 30 seconds, she forgot everything. Forgot the war, forgot the camp, forgot who she was supposed to be and who the Americans were supposed to be. There was only the bacon and the overwhelming, almost obscene pleasure of eating something rich and fatty and abundant. She reached for the second piece. Halfway through chewing, reality crashed back. Her mother, in Munich. What was her mother eating right now? It was morning there too, 6 hours ahead, early afternoon. Was she eating? Did she have food? The last letter Liesel had received months ago had mentioned rations getting smaller. Bread being cut with sawdust, soup that was mostly water. That was months ago, before the heaviest bombing, before the final collapse. What was her mother eating now? The bacon turned to ash in her mouth, but her body was too hungry to stop. She kept chewing, kept swallowing, reached for the third piece, even as shame burned through her chest. She ate all 6 pieces. She ate the eggs, the bread, the oatmeal with its melting butter, the apple. She ate everything on her plate while her mind screamed at her to stop, to save it, to feel appropriate guilt. But her body overruled everything. 19 years old and 73 pounds, her body knew only one truth. Food was survival. Refusing it was death. When she finished, she sat there with an empty plate and grease still coating her lips and wanted to vomit. Around her, other women were having similar crises. Some ate quickly, furtively, as if speed would somehow make it less real. Others ate slowly, mechanically, faces carefully blank. A few pushed food around their plates, unable to reconcile the abundance with whatever private horror they were imagining back home. One woman, young, maybe 17, started crying while eating. Silent tears running down her face as she chewed bacon and bread. She didn't stop eating, just cried and ate and cried. No one commented. Everyone understood. Greta ate 1 piece of bacon, just one. She cut it into small bites and consumed it methodically, showing no emotion, no pleasure, no guilt, pure function. Then she ate the eggs and bread with the same mechanical efficiency. When she finished, she stood and left without a word. But Liesel had seen her hands. They'd been shaking. Frida ate everything, all 6 pieces of bacon, all the eggs, everything. She ate with the focused intensity of someone who'd made a decision. "I'll hate myself later," she muttered to Liesel. "Right now I'm hungry. Right now there's food. That's all that matters." It was the most honest thing anyone had said all morning. That afternoon, Liesel reported to the infirmary as usual. She worked alongside Captain Morrison, treating minor injuries and illnesses. A soldier with a sprained ankle, a POW with a persistent cough that needed monitoring, another POW with severe malnutrition complications that required careful feeding schedules. She watched Morrison work. He treated the German POWs exactly the same way he treated American soldiers. Same care, same attention, same medical protocols. A wound was a wound, an illness was an illness. Nationality didn't factor into his decisions at all. "Why?" Liesel asked him during a quiet moment. Her English was halting but functional. "Why same treatment?" Morrison looked up from the chart he was writing. He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Geneva Convention," he said simply. "But also," he paused, "a wound is a wound. Doesn't matter who's bleeding. My job is to stop the bleeding, that's all." It was such a simple answer, so pragmatic it was almost disappointing. Liesel had expected something more, some grand moral statement, some proof of American superiority. Instead, she got professional medical ethics delivered in a tired monotone. Somehow that made it more devastating. This wasn't propaganda. This wasn't a performance. This was just how they did things. Default humanity, not exceptional kindness. The realization sat heavy in her chest all day. Week 5 arrived with an announcement that sent a wave of desperate hope through the barracks. Mail call, letters from home. The first communication many of the women had received since their capture. The Americans had been working with the Red Cross to establish mail service. It had taken time routing through Switzerland, sorting, translating when necessary, screening for security concerns. But it was finally happening. Corporal Thatcher stood in the yard with a canvas bag full of letters. He read names one by one. Some women rushed forward eagerly. Others approached slowly, afraid of what they might learn. Some names weren't called at all, and those women stood silent, trying not to show their devastation. Vogel Liesel. Her heart stopped, then started again too fast. She walked forward on legs that didn't feel steady. Thatcher handed her an envelope, thin paper, her brother's handwriting, not her mother's. Her 16-year-old brother writing because she didn't let herself finish that thought. She walked back to the barracks, sat on her bunk, and opened the letter with shaking hands. The handwriting was cramped and small, trying to fit as much as possible onto the precious paper. Dear Liesel, mother is alive. Father is gone. Confirmed dead Eastern Front, January. We received notice last month. Munich is mostly rubble. Our street is half destroyed. We live in the cellar now. Safer from bombing. Food is scarce. Official ration is 800 calories per day, but we rarely get that much. Mostly turnip soup, black bread when available. Mother saves her portions for me. I tell her not to, but she does anyway. Last week she fainted from hunger. The neighbor helped her. She recovered, but she is very thin now. The Hitler youth leaders say we should be proud to sacrifice for victory, but Liesel, I am just hungry, all the time. I dream about food. Remember the cake Mother made for your birthday in 1942? I dream about that cake. Are you safe? Are the Americans cruel? I hope not. I hope you have food and shelter. Please write if you can. Mother asks about you every day. Your brother Liesel read it twice, then a third time. She looked at the breakfast plate that had held 6 pieces of bacon just hours ago. Her stomach was still full, still digesting all that protein and fat. 2,800 calories today. She'd eaten 2,800 calories while her mother ate 800. While her brother dreamed about birthday cake from 3 years ago. While her mother fainted from hunger and saved portions for a 16-year-old boy who was probably skin and bones. The numbers wouldn't stop running through her head. 2,800. 800. Her mother eating 800 calories while saving portions for her son. Liesel eating 2,800 calories, including 6 pieces of bacon that had melted on her tongue like warm honey. She'd enjoyed it. That was the worst part. For 30 seconds she'd forgotten everything and just enjoyed the taste of rich, fatty meat. She was the monster now. She folded the letter carefully and lay down on her bunk. She didn't cry. Couldn't cry. The guilt was too big for tears. It sat in her chest like concrete, heavy and immovable. That evening she ate only half her dinner, pushed the rest away. The next morning she ate 1 piece of bacon instead of 6, forced down some eggs, left the bread. By the 3rd day she was eating maybe 1,500 calories. Her body, just starting to recover, began to decline again. Captain Morrison noticed within a week. He found her in the infirmary during a quiet afternoon. "Nurse Vogel," he said, "step on the scale, please." She did. The number had dropped. She'd lost 3 pounds. Morrison's face tightened. "What's going on?" "Nothing." "That's a lie. You're a medical professional. You know what malnutrition looks like. You were recovering. Now you're declining. Why?" Liesel couldn't meet his eyes. "My family," she said finally. "They are hungry. How can I eat when they starve?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "Show me the letter," he said gently. She did. He read it carefully. When he finished, he folded it and handed it back. "Your mother is saving food for your brother," he said. "Correct. Yes. Why? Because she loves him. Because she wants him to survive. And if he refused to eat it, if he starved himself out of guilt for her sacrifice, how would she feel? Liesl said nothing. Your mother would want you alive, Morrison continued. She would want you to eat, to survive, to come home healthy. Starving yourself here doesn't feed her. It just means two people suffering instead of one. I know that, Liesl whispered. I know, but I cannot stop feeling guilt, Morrison finished. I know, but guilt that destroys you helps no one. He pulled a chair over and sat down heavily. I'm going to tell you something, he said. Not as a doctor, as a person. Liesl waited. My wife is in Oregon, he said. She writes me every week, tells me about rationing, about Victory Gardens, about saving bacon grease and collecting scrap metal, about how they're all doing their part for the war effort. He paused. She's fine, healthy, well-fed even with rationing. Meanwhile, I'm here eating the same food as the soldiers while German civilians starve in bombed-out cities. Does that seem fair to you? No. It's not fair. None of this is fair. War isn't fair. But me refusing to eat wouldn't help German civilians. You refusing to eat doesn't help your mother. You want to help her survive, get healthy, go home when this is over, rebuild. That's how you honor her sacrifice. Liesl felt tears sliding down her face. I ate bacon, she whispered. 6 pieces, and I enjoyed it, while my mother faints from hunger. Yes, Morrison said simply. You did. You're human. Humans enjoy food. That's not a crime. That's biology. He stood up. Eat, Nurse Vogel. That's a medical order. Your mother would want you to. He walked away, leaving her sitting there with tears on her face and a choice to make. That evening she ate, not with joy, but with purpose. Fuel for survival, for the future, for the possibility of going home and helping rebuild. It didn't stop the guilt, but it made the guilt bearable. Greta received no letter. Week 5, 6, 7. Other names called, never hers. Her family had been in Berlin, Soviet zone now. Communications completely severed. They were either dead or unreachable, and there was no way to know which. She sat on her bunk on the evening of the 7th mail call and stared at nothing. Liesl saw her. For the first time since they'd arrived, Greta looked breakable. Not broken, not yet. But the cracks were showing. Greta, Liesl said quietly. Are you fine? Greta said automatically, then stopped. No, not fine. It was the first honest thing she'd said in 2 months. She looked at Liesl with eyes that held too much. I believed, she said. I believed we were right. I believed the Americans were monsters. I believed everything. And now my family is gone, and the monsters are feeding me, and I don't know what anything means anymore. Liesl had no answer for that. Neither did anyone else. They sat in silence as the evening darkened around them. Frida received a letter from her husband. He was alive in a British POW camp being treated decently. He asked if the Americans were cruel. She wrote back, They feed us like guests. I don't understand it either, but I'm alive. I'm safe. Come home when you can. She sealed the letter and handed it to the mail officer and felt lighter than she had in months. Practical Frida, taking what life gave her and moving forward. August arrived with suffocating heat and news that changed the world. August 6th, 1945. The announcement came during evening roll call. Corporal Thatcher stood before the assembled women with a piece of paper in his hand and an expression that was impossible to read. There's been a development in the Pacific Theater, he said. His German was careful, precise. The United States has deployed a new weapon, an atomic bomb, dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The weapon has... He paused, looking for words. The weapon has destroyed the entire city. Casualties are estimated at 70,000 dead, immediately, with more expected from radiation sickness. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Japan is expected to surrender within days. Thatcher continued. The war will be over. Still no sound. The women stood frozen, trying to comprehend. 70,000. In an instant. A city. Gone. Thatcher folded the paper slowly. This is not something to celebrate, he said quietly. This is just more death. I'm tired of death. We're all tired of death. He looked at the faces before him. German women who'd been enemies 6 months ago, who'd been taught to hate Americans, who'd expected brutality and received bacon. When you go home, he said, remember this. We could have treated you like enemies. We chose not to. I hope, his voice cracked slightly, I hope you'll choose the same. When you rebuild, when you teach your children. Choose mercy over revenge. Choose humanity over hate. Because hate is what got us here. Hate is what led to 70,000 people vaporized in an instant. He dismissed them. No one moved at first. Then, slowly, quietly, the women dispersed. Liesl walked back to the barracks, feeling numb. 70,000. She couldn't picture it, couldn't comprehend it. The number was too large to mean anything. But one thing was clear. The war was ending, soon. And everything would have to be rebuilt from ruins. Greta sat on her bunk and spoke to no one in particular. They dropped a sun on a city. What have we all done? For the first time since the war began, she sounded lost. Frida, pragmatic to the end, simply said, It's over. We can go home. That's all that matters. But even she didn't sound entirely convinced. That night, Liesl lay in her bunk and thought about transformation. 4 months ago, she'd weighed 73 pounds. Now she weighed 98. 25 pounds of healing, of care, of bacon and eggs and bread and safety. Around her, the other women showed similar changes. Greta had gained 21 pounds, Frida 26. Across the camp, the average weight had risen from 89 pounds to 117. 28 pounds average gain, physical transformation mirroring something deeper. They'd arrived as true believers in propaganda, as enemies certain of American cruelty. They were leaving as students of a different truth. In the recreation room that week, Liesl sat at the old piano and played a Brahms lullaby. Her mother had taught it to her when she was 8. The notes came back easily, muscle memory, older than the war. American soldiers stopped to listen. One young private, maybe 19, from Iowa, stood nearby with his eyes closed. My grandmother played that, he said when she finished, in Nebraska, before she died. Liesl looked at him. He looked like her brother. Same age, same build, same lost expression. It is beautiful song, she said in halting English. Yeah, he agreed. Music's like that. Doesn't matter where you're from. It was such a simple observation, but it cracked something open inside her. Music transcending war, humanity transcending nationality, the possibility that people were just people no matter what uniform they wore or language they spoke. Greta watched this interaction from across the room. She didn't join, didn't comment, but she didn't object either. And for Greta, that was progress. Frida taught some of the American kitchen staff a German card game. They taught her poker. Everyone laughed when someone made a mistake. The sound of that laughter, genuine unforced crossing language barriers, felt like proof of something important. Week by week, day by day, bacon strip by bacon strip, the transformation continued. Not dramatic, not sudden, just steady and irreversible. They'd come as enemies. They were becoming something else. And Part 3 would show them what that meant when they returned to a homeland that had become unrecognizable. Going home meant leaving the only place that had treated them like human beings in 2 years. The cruelest paradox their enemy gave them dignity, their own country had forgotten. The announcement came on a humid morning in late August, 2 weeks after Hiroshima, 1 week after Nagasaki, 3 days after Japan's formal surrender. The war was over. Corporal Thatcher gathered the women in the central yard. The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly, but no one moved to find shade. They knew what was coming. "Repatriation begins in 2 weeks," Thatcher said. His German had improved considerably over the past 5 months. "You'll be processed through the Red Cross, transported to ships in New York, then home to Germany. The journey will take approximately 3 weeks total." Home. The word hung in the air like something fragile and uncertain. For months, home had been an abstract concept, a memory of streets that might not exist anymore, of families who might be dead, of a country that had spent itself completely and now lay in ruins across an ocean. But now it was real, immediate, unavoidable. Liesl felt her stomach twist. She wanted to see her mother, her brother, wanted to know they'd survived, but she was also terrified of what she'd find. The letters had painted a grim picture: rubble, starvation, chaos. And that was months ago. How much worse had it gotten? Around her she could see the same conflict playing out on other faces, relief mixed with dread, hope tangled with fear. Greta stood rigid, her expression carefully neutral. But Liesl noticed her hands were clasped tightly behind her back, knuckles white. Frida looked tired, just tired. "Finally," she muttered. "Finally we can go home." But even practical Frida sounded uncertain. After the announcement, Thatcher added something unexpected. "Some of you have been offered positions here. Translation work, medical assistance for the next groups of POWs coming through. If you wish to stay in the United States, you may apply for extended work permits. Eventually, citizenship." A murmur ran through the crowd. Stay in America. With the enemy who'd turned out not to be enemies at all. Thatcher looked directly at Liesl. "Nurse Vogel, Captain Morrison has requested you specifically. You've been invaluable in the infirmary. There's a place for you here if you want it." Liesl's heart hammered. Stay. Safe. Fed. Working as a real nurse with real supplies. Building a life in a country that had shown her more kindness in 5 months than her own country had in 5 years. But her brother's letter sat folded in her pocket. "Mother asks about you every day." She met Thatcher's eyes. "Thank you. But I must go home. My family needs me." He nodded slowly. "I understand. The offer stands if you change your mind." She wouldn't change her mind. She couldn't. But the fact that the offer existed at all, that felt like something worth remembering. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange suspension. The routines continued: work, meals, roll call, but everything felt temporary now. Finite. The women began to prepare mentally for departure, for the journey back to a homeland none of them quite recognized anymore. Liesl continued working in the infirmary. Captain Morrison taught her advanced wound care techniques, sterilization protocols, nutrition therapy for severe malnutrition cases. He taught her as if she were a colleague, not a former enemy, not a prisoner, just another medical professional who needed skills for the difficult work ahead. "You're going to see things," he said one afternoon. "Bad things, worse than what you saw during the war. The aftermath is always harder than the fighting. People broken in ways that don't show on X-rays." He handed her a medical textbook, English language heavy valuable. "Take this. Learn what you can. Germany's going to need every skilled person it can get." Liesl held the book like it was sacred. "I cannot pay. It's not for sale. It's a gift. Use it well." She promised she would. Greta spent her final days in the laundry working in silence. But on the last day she approached the laundry supervisor, a sergeant from Tennessee who'd always been polite but distant. "Thank you," she said stiffly in English. "You were decent." The sergeant blinked in surprise, then extended his hand. "Good luck out there, ma'am." Greta shook it. The gesture felt monumental, a handshake across an unbridgeable divide that had somehow been bridged anyway. Frida baked bread, proper German bread using the camp kitchen's supplies. She baked enough for the entire American staff and distributed it with a simple card that read, "Danke, the German women." The American soldiers accepted the bread with genuine appreciation. Some had tears in their eyes. These were men who'd seen combat, who'd lost friends to German bullets and artillery, who had every reason to hate. But they ate German bread and said thank you and meant it. small acts of reciprocity in the shadow of enormous violence. On the final evening, Corporal Thatcher assembled all 847 women one last time. He stood before them, looking older than his 38 years. The war had aged everyone prematurely. "In 2 days, you go home," he began. "I want to tell you something before you do." The women stood in silent rows, waiting. "We treated you well because it was right, not because you earned it, not because you deserved it more than any other prisoners, but because treating people with dignity is what we believe in. It's what we fought for." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your leaders lied to you about us, told you we were monsters, savages, that we'd torture and starve you." He gestured around the camp. "You've seen the truth. We're not monsters. We're just people trying to do the right thing in a situation where right and wrong got very complicated." Someone in the back coughed. Otherwise, silence. "But I'll tell you something else," Thatcher continued. "Our leaders probably lied about you too, told us you were all fanatics, all evil, all deserving of whatever we wanted to do to you." He looked across the faces before him. Young women, tired women, women who'd been clerks and nurses and teachers before the war, destroyed everything. "You're not evil. You're just people who got caught up in something terrible. We all did." His voice dropped lower. "When you go home, when you see the destruction, the hunger, the chaos, remember this place. Remember that we had every reason to hate you and chose mercy instead. And when you rebuild your country, when you raise your children, when you teach the next generation, remember that mercy is stronger than revenge. Remember that humanity is a choice, not a condition." He straightened to attention. "You came here as enemies. You leave as, I hope, something better. I hope you'll take what you learned here and build something new. Something that doesn't end in cities being vaporized, in families being destroyed, in young people dying for old men's pride." He saluted, formally, respectfully. "Good luck, all of you." The women stood frozen for a moment. Then, spontaneously, they began to applaud. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady, sincere applause from 847 people who'd learned that the world was more complicated than propaganda had taught them. Thatcher's eyes glistened. He nodded once and dismissed them. Liesl returned to her bunk and began packing her few possessions: the medical textbook, a comb, a bar of soap she'd saved wrapped carefully in paper, a photograph of the camp that an American soldier had taken and given her. Small things, but they represented something larger. Evidence that this had been real, that mercy had existed, that enemies had chosen to be human instead. She touched the soap wrapper one more time, felt the paper crinkle under her fingers, then packed it carefully at the bottom of her small bag where it wouldn't get crushed. Departure morning arrived cold and grey, unusual for Georgia in September, but fitting somehow. The women gathered at the same train platform where they'd arrived 5 months earlier. The same tracks, the same pine trees in the distance. But everything else had changed. They'd arrived weighing an average of 89 pounds. They were leaving weighing an average of 117 pounds. 28 pounds of healing, of care, of bacon and bread and safety. They'd arrived broken and terrified. They were leaving whole enough to face what came next. The train sat waiting, but this time the boxcar doors stood open in invitation, not threat. Inside, the cars had been fitted with benches. Not comfortable, but not the bare metal floors they'd endured on the way here. Small mercies even to the end. Corporal Thatcher stood near the platform, shaking hands with women as they boarded. A brief word for each, a nod, a moment of acknowledgement. When Liesl reached him, she stopped. "Corporal Thatcher," she said in careful English, "you taught me more than any officer I ever served." His weathered face softened slightly. "You're going to do good things, Nurse Vogel. I know it." "How you know?" "Because you care. That's enough." He extended his hand. She took it. The handshake lasted longer than protocol required. "Be the kindness you want to see," he said quietly. "Teach it to others." "I will." she promised. I will. Then impulsively she hugged him. Brief but genuine. A violation of every rule about fraternization and proper conduct. She didn't care. Thatcher returned the embrace, awkward but sincere. When they separated, his eyes were wet. Go on now, he said gruffly. Your mother's waiting. Liesl boarded the train with tears streaming down her face. Greta approached Thatcher with her typical stiff posture. She extended her hand formally. I was wrong about you, she said in English. The words came slowly, carefully. Not about everything, but about you, about this place, about mercy. Thatcher shook her hand firmly. That's a start. A good start. What I do now? Greta asked. How I rebuild when everything is broken. Same way you'd rebuild anything, one piece at a time. Start with yourself, then help others rebuild themselves. Eventually you'll have something new. Greta nodded slowly. I will try. That's all anyone can do. She boarded without looking back. But Liesl saw her wipe her eyes once she thought no one was watching. Frida was last. She approached Thatcher with a small wrapped package. Bread, she said simply. For journey home. You were kind. I not forget. Thatcher accepted the package with visible emotion. Thank you. I won't forget either. You good man, Frida said. War make monsters. You choose to be human. That matter. So did you, Thatcher replied. So did all of you. Frida smiled, rare and genuine, then boarded the train. Thatcher stood at attention as the train pulled away. He saluted one final time. Inside the cars, women waved from windows. Some cried. Some sat in silence. All of them were changed in ways they were only beginning to understand. The train gathered speed and Camp Crawford disappeared behind the pine trees. The journey home took 3 weeks. Train to New York, processing through Red Cross stations, medical checkups, documentation. Then onto ships, converted troop transports, crowded but organized. The Atlantic crossing took 10 days through rough seas that left half the women sick and miserable. But eventually they saw land. Europe. France first. The coast emerged from mourning fog cliffs and beaches that had seen so much death just a year ago. The women lined the rails, staring in silence. Then trains again. Through France, where the destruction was visible from the windows, villages with missing buildings, bridges hastily repaired, fields still scarred with trenches and craters. At the German border, the change was dramatic. Systematic devastation. Not the chaos of battle, but the methodical destruction of total war. Cities bombed to rubble. Infrastructure collapsed. People moving like ghosts through ruins. The women pressed their faces to the windows, trying to comprehend. This was home. This was what they'd been defending. Liesl felt her stomach turn. Munich would be like this. Worse, maybe. The train slowed as it entered what used to be Frankfurt. 70% destroyed. Buildings reduced to hollow shells. Rubble piled in mountains along the streets. People digging through wreckage looking for anything salvageable. And the people themselves. Skeletal, hollow-eyed, dressed in rags, moving with the slow, careful deliberation of the severely malnourished. The contrast was obscene. The women on the train were healthy, clean. Their clothes, though simple, were intact and laundered. They'd gained weight, colour had returned to their faces. Their hair was clean and brushed. The people outside looked like the women had looked 5 months ago. Or worse. "Oh God," someone whispered. "What happened?" Total collapse. That's what happened. A nation that had bet everything on victory and lost, now paying the price in starvation and ruin. The trains split at Frankfurt, different groups heading to different regions. Liesl's group continued south toward Munich and Bavaria. Greta's headed north toward Berlin and the Soviet zone, Frida's west toward Hamburg and the British zone. They said goodbye at the platform, 3 women who'd been strangers 5 months ago, now connected by shared experience that couldn't be explained to anyone who hadn't lived it. Survive, Frida said simply. Build something good. Teach mercy, Greta added, her voice rough. Even when it's hard. Remember kindness, Liesel finished. Pass it forward. They embraced briefly, then separated to their respective trains. Liesel never saw them again, but she carried them with her. Munich appeared through the train window like a nightmare made real. 70% destroyed. The beautiful city she'd grown up in reduced to skeletal remains. The cathedral still stood damaged, but present. A few major buildings remained as hollow shells. Everything else was rubble. People lived in cellars, in ruins, in makeshift shelters. They moved through the streets slowly, carefully conserving energy, because energy required calories they didn't have. The train station was damaged but functional. Liesel stepped onto the platform with her small bag and her medical textbook and looked around. Home. This was home. She began walking. The streets were barely recognizable, landmarks gone. Whole neighborhoods vanished. She navigated by memory and guesswork, climbing over rubble, detouring around collapsed buildings. An hour later, she found her street, or what was left of it. Half the buildings were destroyed. Hers stood partially intact, the front wall gone, the upper floors collapsed, but the cellar entrance still accessible. She climbed down the rubble-strewn stairs and called out, "Mother, anyone." A sound, movement in the darkness. Then her brother appeared, 16 years old. He looked 12, skeletal, huge eyes in a gaunt face, clothes hanging off a frame that had no meat on it. "Liesel." His voice cracked. "Liesel." He stumbled forward and she caught him. He weighed nothing. She could feel every bone through his shirt. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm here." Her mother emerged from the deeper darkness of the cellar. 50 years old. She looked 70. Hair completely grey, face collapsed into angles and shadows, eyes enormous and haunted. But alive. They were alive. Her mother stared at Liesel in shock. You're healthy. How?" Liesel looked down at herself. 100 pounds now after the journey. Still thin by normal standards, but compared to her family she looked robust, well-fed, almost plump. The guilt came roaring back. "The Americans," she said quietly. "They fed us, treated us well." Her mother shook her head in disbelief. "But the propaganda said, the propaganda lied, Mother, about everything." They stood in the dim cellar, 3 family members separated by an ocean of different experiences, and tried to find common ground. Liesel unpacked her bag. The bread Frida had given her still relatively fresh. She broke it into 3 pieces. Her family ate it slowly, reverently, making each bite last. While they ate, Liesel told them everything. The train ride, the camp, the bathhouse, the bacon. Her brother listened with wide eyes. 6 pieces of real bacon. Yes. And they just gave it to you. Every day, for 5 months. Her mother wept quietly. Not from sadness, from something more complicated. Relief that Liesel had been cared for. Grief that they hadn't been. Confusion about a world where enemies showed more mercy than allies. "What do we do now?" her brother asked. Liesel pulled out the medical textbook. "We rebuild. I'm going to work. Help people. Use what I learned. From the Americans. From humans who chose to be kind. Yes." The next morning, Liesel reported to the nearest functioning hospital, a partially destroyed building with makeshift wards in the cellar. They needed help desperately. She showed them her training, her textbook, her knowledge. They hired her immediately. She began working 12-hour days, treating injuries, infections, malnutrition, applying the techniques Captain Morrison had taught her, treating everyone equally, former Nazis, refugees, displaced persons, children, elderly. A wound was a wound. An illness was an illness. The American lessons applied in German ruins. Other patients noticed. "You're different from the other nurses," one woman said. "Gentler. Why?" "I learned from someone who believed every person deserves dignity," Liesel answered. I'm trying to practice what he taught. Word spread. The nurse who'd been in America, who brought back strange ideas about equality and mercy. Some people were suspicious. Others were curious. A few were grateful. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Liesel began to build something new from the rubble. In Berlin, Greta arrived to find her worst fears confirmed. Her apartment building was gone, completely destroyed. A crater where it used to stand. Neighbors told her what had happened. February 1945. A direct hit. Her parents had been inside. They'd died instantly, which was the only mercy in the story. Greta stood at the edge of the crater and felt nothing. Too much loss. Too much destruction. The numbness was protective. But she was carrying an American dictionary and the memory of Corporal Thatcher saying, "Choose mercy over revenge." She found a refugee center in the Soviet zone. Hundreds of orphaned children. No teachers, no supplies, just chaos and hunger and trauma. She volunteered. The administrators were skeptical. What can you teach them? The old ways failed. New ways, Greta said. Critical thinking. Question everything, especially propaganda, and English. They'll need English for the new world. They gave her a corner of a damaged building and 40 children. She taught them using the American dictionary. Taught them to question authority. Taught them that enemies could be human and allies could be monsters, and the truth was always more complicated than anyone wanted to admit. "Where you learn this?" one bright girl asked. "From the enemy," Greta answered honestly, "who turned out to be better teachers than my friends." The girl thought about that. Then maybe enemy and friend are wrong words. Maybe they are, Greta agreed. Maybe there are just people, and we get to choose what kind we want to be. In Hamburg, Frida reunited with her husband. He'd been released from British custody 2 weeks earlier. They held each other in the ruins of their city and cried. Not from sadness, from relief. Against all odds, they'd both survived. "What now?" he asked. Frida looked around at the destruction, at the starving people, at the children begging for food. "We cook," she said simply. "We feed people. With what? We have nothing. We start small, build up." Remember how Americans did it? Everyone equal, everyone fed. They borrowed money from aid organizations, found a partially destroyed building with a functional kitchen, opened a soup kitchen. The first day they fed 20 people. The second day, 50. By the end of the month, 200 people came daily for whatever food Frida could provide. She charged nothing. Pay if you can, eat if you can't. People asked why. Why give away food when she could sell it? "Someone fed me when I was the enemy," she said. "I'm just passing it on." The American kindness rippling outward through practical action. 5 years passed. 1950. Germany was still broken, but beginning to rebuild. The Marshall Plan had injected resources. The occupation zones were stabilizing. People were eating again. Not well, but eating. Liesel, now 24, ran a small nursing school in Munich. She taught young German nurses the techniques she'd learned from Captain Morrison. But more than techniques, she taught philosophy. "Treat every patient with dignity," she said in every class. "No matter who they are, no matter what they've done, dignity is not earned, it's inherent." Her students asked where she learned this. She showed them the photograph from Camp Crawford, her at 98 pounds standing next to Corporal Thatcher, both smiling slightly despite everything. "I learned it from the enemy," she said, "in a POW camp in Georgia, where Americans gave us hot showers and bacon when they could have given us cruelty." The students were skeptical. Propaganda was hard to shake, even defeated propaganda. "Why would they do that?" one asked. "Because they believed treating people well was right. Not because we deserved it, but because they chose to be human instead of monsters." She paused, looking at the young faces before her. "That choice is available to all of us, every day, in every interaction. You can choose cruelty or kindness, Revenge or mercy, hate or humanity, choose wisely. The world you build depends on it. They listened. Some believed, some didn't, but the seeds were planted. In 1955, Liesl received a letter forwarded through the Red Cross, American postage, Georgia return address. She opened it with shaking hands. Dear Nurse Vogel, I hope this letter finds you well. I've often wondered what became of you and the other women who passed through Camp Crawford. The camp is closed now, converted to other uses. But I still walk by the old bathhouse sometimes, still remember all of you. I retired from the army last year, back to farming in Kansas. Quieter life, better for an old man. I wanted you to know something. You and the others, you proved that enemies can become humans again. In a war that destroyed so much, that small proof of humanity meant more than you know. I hope you're using that medical textbook. I hope you're teaching others what we tried to teach you, that mercy matters. That kindness is a choice. That hate doesn't have to win. Thank you for choosing to be human too. It wasn't easy, I know, but you did it anyway. The bathhouse still stands, by the way. They're making it a historical site, a reminder of what we did right. Take care of yourself. Respectfully, Raymond Thatcher. Liesl read it 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in the box where she kept the soap wrapper, the photograph her brother's first letter. Evidence. Proof that mercy had existed, that kindness had been real. She sat down and wrote back. Dear Corporal Thatcher, your letter arrived today. I cried reading it, good tears. I'm well. Running a nursing school in Munich, teaching young nurses to treat every patient with dignity. I tell them about you, about Camp Crawford, about the bacon and the bathhouse and the impossible mercy. Some believe me, some don't, but I keep teaching it anyway, because you're right, mercy matters. Kindness is a choice, and hate doesn't have to win. My mother recovered. My brother is in university now, studying engineering. We rebuilt our lives from ruins, like Germany is rebuilding from ruins. It's slow, sometimes painful, but we're doing it. And we're trying to do it right this time, with the lessons you taught us. Thank you for choosing humanity when you could have chosen revenge. Thank you for teaching me that enemies are just people we haven't understood yet. The bathhouse should be a historical site. What happened there changed 847 lives, changed the course of families, changed how we understand the world. I tell my students, in the darkest moment of human history, some people chose light. Be those people. I hope your farm thrives. I hope you find peace. With deep gratitude, Liesl Vogel. She mailed it the next day. The letters continued sporadically over the years. Thatcher writing about his farm, his grandchildren, his quiet life. Liesl writing about her students, the rebuilding of Munich, the slow transformation of Germany from ruins to something new. They never met again, but the connection remained. 2 people from opposite sides of a terrible war choosing to remember the humanity they'd found in each other. 1960. Greta, now 49, was principal of a progressive school in West Berlin. She taught students to question everything, to think critically, to resist propaganda from any source. She kept the American dictionary on her desk. When students asked about it, she told them the truth. I was wrong about many things. I believed lies. This dictionary reminds me to stay humble, to always question, to remember that enemies can teach you more than friends sometimes. She never married, never had children of her own, but she influenced thousands of students who went on to build a new Germany, one that questioned authority, valued critical thinking, and rejected the easy lies of nationalism. The American lessons transmitted through German education. 1965. Frieda, now 47, ran a successful restaurant in Hamburg. But every Tuesday, the restaurant became a soup kitchen. Free food for anyone who needed it. When asked why she always gave the same answer, "Someone fed me when I was the enemy. I'm just passing it on." Her husband supported her completely. Together they fed thousands of people over the years, refugees, the poor, the struggling, No questions asked, no judgment, just food and dignity. The American kindness multiplied through German generosity. The impact rippled outward in ways that couldn't be measured. 847 women had passed through Camp Crawford. 809 returned to Germany. Of those, 127 became teachers carrying lessons about mercy and critical thinking into classrooms across the country. 89 became nurses applying American medical ethics in German hospitals. 67 worked as translators for the American occupation building bridges between former enemies. 43 became community leaders, organizing aid and reconstruction with principles learned in a Georgia POW camp. And all of them, every single one, told their children, their grandchildren, their students, their patients, their communities about the impossible mercy they'd experienced. The story spread, not through official channels or propaganda, through quiet conversations, kitchen table discussions, bedtime stories. Your grandmother was a prisoner of war. The Americans fed her bacon, gave her hot showers, treated her like a human being when they had every reason not to. Simple truth passed down through generations. It changed things, subtly, slowly, but irreversibly. Germany rebuilt, not just physically but philosophically. The next generation grew up with stories about American mercy instead of American cruelty, about kindness instead of revenge, about humans choosing to be better than war demanded. It wasn't the only factor in Germany's transformation, but it was a factor, a small, persistent reminder that enemies could choose humanity, and that choice mattered. 2001. 56 years after the last train departed, construction workers breaking ground for a Georgia shopping mall made an unexpected discovery. Beneath the old bathhouse foundation, the only structure still standing from Camp Crawford, they found a rusted metal box. Inside, 847 letters, written in German, sealed, never sent. The women had buried them before leaving letters to families they couldn't reach, to addresses that no longer existed, to a world that had vanished. A time capsule of mercy that no one was meant to find. But someone did. Researchers translated them, published excerpts. The story spread. An old woman in Munich saw it on the news. Liesel Vogel, now 75, retired, but still sharp. She was interviewed, asked about her experience. "They gave us hot water when we'd gone 6 months without bathing," she said simply. "They gave us 6 pieces of bacon when our families were starving. They treated us like human beings when we were enemies." "Why do you think they did that?" the interviewer asked. Liesel smiled. "Because mercy is a choice, and Americans chose it. That choice changed my life. Changed 847 lives, changed Germany in small ways, ripples in a pond." "Do you have any message for people today?" She thought for a moment. "Remember that hate is easy, revenge is easy, dehumanizing your enemies is easy, but mercy is hard. Mercy requires courage, requires choosing humanity when everything tells you to choose violence." She paused. "The Americans chose mercy, and it turned enemies into teachers, into nurses, into people who spent the rest of their lives passing that mercy forward." She looked directly at the camera. "In the end, America's greatest weapon wasn't bombs or bullets. It was 6 pieces of bacon hot showers and the radical choice to treat enemies like human beings. That lesson outlasted the war and changed the world." The interview aired across Germany, across Europe, across America. People watched, people remembered, people thought about what it means to choose mercy over revenge. And in a small way, in living rooms and classrooms and dinner table conversations, the lesson continued. 847 women, 5 months in a Georgia POW camp, 28 pounds of weight gain, and a lifetime of lessons about what humans can be when they choose kindness over cruelty. The bathhouse still stands. A historical marker was placed in 2003 Camp Crawford Women's Bathhouse, 1945. Here, 847 German women prisoners of war received treatment that honored their humanity. Their experience demonstrated that even in war, mercy remains a choice. May we always choose wisely. The letters were donated to the National Archives, available for anyone to read. Evidence of an experiment in humanity that succeeded beyond measure. And somewhere in Munich, an old woman keeps a bar of soap wrapped in paper, stamped with a US Army logo. From 1945. She never used it, never unwrapped it. It's not soap anymore. It's proof. Proof that enemies can be kind, that hate doesn't have to win, that humanity is always a choice, and that choice matters more than we know. The women weighed 71 pounds when they arrived. They carried 56 years of gratitude when they left, and that gratitude transformed more lives than any weapon ever could.